in order to move the motion, I call the leader of that party ready in his place on the front bench, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I begin, I'm sure the whole House would like to join me in congratulating the former member for Clackmannan and East Stirling and former presiding officer of the Scottish Parliament, George Reid, who is celebrating his golden wedding anniversary today with his wife, Daphne. Mr. Speaker, the principle of unlimited sovereignty of Parliament is a distinctly English principle and has no counterpart in Scottish constitutional law. Mr. Speaker, these words are not mine. These are the words of the Lord President in 1953 during the case of McCormick versus the Lord Advocate. This Parliament, Mr. Speaker, I accept, has a great deal of power, and rightly all of us who are Democrats should respect the will of the people. But if we are to accept and respect that will in this place, then why not in Scotland? Mr. Speaker, why is it that the Tory government thinks it can do whatever it wants to Scotland and get away with it? Many in Scotland are outraged that the Conservative government has argued that times are not normal and that allows them to change the devolution settlement in the teeth of the opposition of the Scottish Parliament. Put simply, the Conservatives have no mandate for the power grab on the Scottish Parliament. You can see the case is this. In Scotland, it is the Scottish people who are sovereign.
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman for giving way. He's spoken about a power grab. If there is a power grab, why did his leader in Scotland, the First Minister, have to increase her cabinet from 16 to 26 because of all the extra powers coming to Holyrood, according to Nicola Sturgeon?
That's right. My goodness. We are talking about the sovereignty of the Scottish people, and that's what we get. I'm not even going to dignify that with any... You know, this is early in the debate. Can I suggest that people will be watching this, and it might be an idea,
Order. There is a tendency for there to be what I would call a gesticulation fest whenever there is a debate between members of the Scottish National Party and government backbenchers. And the right honourable gentleman must be heard, and I say very gently to Mr Thompson, who is normally a model of the urbane representative of his people, that it is indeed an early stage, and he must remember above all the merits of calm. Mr Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I must say that the reason that we have called this debate in our opposition time today is the real anger that people in Scotland feel about what has taken place. That the Parliament that Scotland voted for in the referendum in 1997 is being attacked. That our rights are being attacked by a Conservative government backed by their so-called Scottish Tory friends that went through the lobbies to take away powers from the Scottish Parliament. And we're having this debate tonight, and let's look around us. I can see my colleagues from the SNP, and to be fair, I can see colleagues from the Liberal Democrats and the Labour MPs from Scotland that are here as well. Where is the rest of the House? Where are the Conservative MPs that voted the measures through? They can't even be bothered to turn up to defend what the Conservatives have done to Scotland. That's the reality. I'm not going to give way. Sit down. Is it very fitting today, Mr Speaker, that the Scottish National Party use our opposition day on the 4th of July, Independence Day, to defend the interests and the rights and the will of the Scottish people? Listen, it might not be Independence Day to you, but I'll tell you this. The way that the Conservative Party are treating Scotland, our Independence Day is coming, and it's coming soon. The claim of right acknowledges the...
Very grateful to him, but the honourable gentleman says that Scotland's independence is coming, and my honourable friend from Orkney and Shetland and myself put an amendment up to his motion today, which unfortunately wasn't selected, but we understand why. But I wonder if he would agree with that Smythe amendment to his motion on the basis that the Scottish people did have a vote in 2014 and they agreed to stay in the United Kingdom.
Well, as a matter of fact, the honourable gentleman is correct. Of course the people in Scotland voted in a referendum in 2014, and I can say to the honourable gentleman and to others that put their name to that amendment that yes, we would have accepted that amendment if it had been taken this afternoon. But you know, the fundamental issue is this. Many people have said that on the 18th of September 2014, when the polls opened in Scotland, between the hours of 7 in the morning and 10 at night, that the people of Scotland had sovereignty in their hands. The difference between those of us on these benches and the Conservatives is that we believe that the Scottish people are always sovereign. And in the light of the change in the facts and the circumstances, and those circumstances being that when Scotland voted to stay in the European Union by a decisive majority, that the wishes and the rights of the Scottish people are being ignored by a Conservative government that wants to drive us out of Europe. In these circumstances, it's perfectly right that the people of Scotland have the opportunity to demonstrate their sovereign will.
The honourable member talks about referenda. I'm getting a bit confused, and it doesn't take a lot, I admit that. But are we talking about the referendum on the 23rd of June when the British people voted to leave the European Union? And if they had decided to remain in the European Union, would those powers still be in Brussels to this day?
They want them to go back.
If you were watching this in subtitles, it might be not for viewers in Scotland, because the fact of the matter is the people of Scotland voted to stay within the European Union, and that's the point. Because if you put that in the context of the debate that took place in Scotland's referendum in 2014, we were told two things. We were told that if we stayed within the United Kingdom, that we were to lead the United Kingdom. But we were also told that if we voted to stay in the United Kingdom, then our part in Europe would also be preserved. And what has happened? Any pretence of Scotland leading the UK has been thrown away by the Secretary of State for Scotland. He doesn't believe that we're a partner in the UK. He believes that we're a part of the UK. How can you have a Secretary of State for Scotland that's just supposed to represent Scotland's interests when he's prepared to lie down and be walked all over because he doesn't see Scotland as being an equal part in the United Kingdom? And he can shout and scream in this chamber, but the reality is he's failed to defend Scotland's interests. Yes, you can point, you can gesticulate, but the people of Scotland...
But I am not pointing or gesticulating. Now, does the right honourable gentleman, I know he's breathing fire at the moment with considerable eloquence and at some pace, does he wish to take an intervention from the Secretary of State, yes or no?
I won't in this case. I'm very grateful for... But he will have his opportunity later on. I want to make progress because I know that many members wish to speak. Mr Speaker, the claim of right acknowledges the sovereign right of the Scottish people to determine the form of government best suited to their needs and the obligation on elected representatives in all their actions and deliberations. The interests of the people of Scotland shall be paramount. The claim of right is not simply a historical document, but it is a fundamental principle that underpins the democracy and constitutional framework of Scotland. The 1989 claim functioned as a declaration of intent on the sovereignty of the Scottish people. It sets the Constitutional Convention which 10 years later saw the people vote in a referendum for the re-establishment of a Scottish Parliament, a Parliament that this UK government now seeks to undermine and ignore. Before those on... I will give way one more time.
The honourable gentleman has made reference to the Scottish Constitutional Convention and the claim of right in 1989. With the benefit of hindsight, does he think perhaps it was now a mistake for the SNP not to sign the claim of right or take part in the Constitutional Convention?
I thank the honourable member for that intervention, and I'm going to come on and deal with that part. But I will do this. I will acknowledge the work of the Constitutional Convention, but let's not forget that the reason that the SNP was in the position that it was is because others in the Constitutional Convention would not allow the principle of independence to be discussed at that time. But I'm grateful of the enormous progress that we have made on the back of the Constitutional Convention. Before those on opposition benches start to jeer and snigger, yes, it is a fact that the Scottish National Party were not present for the signing and did not take part in the convention, but the SNP did take part in early discussions, but withdrew when it became clear that the convention would not countenance independence. We believe and continue to believe that ruling out such an option was to deny a key principle of the claim to choose the best form of government. But we've always supported the sentiments of the claim of right. The SNP has committed and recommitted to its principle. We acknowledge the sovereign rights of the Scottish people determine the form of government best suited to their needs. I really do hope that people in Scotland are watching this. We have a Conservative member from south of the border failed to be elected in Scotland that says all heart. This has nothing to do with heart. This is about the rights of the people of Scotland that voted for devolution, that they're finding that this UK Parliament is taking away their rights in the teeth of the opposition of the Scottish Parliament and every single party in the Scottish Parliament, with the exception of the Scottish Tories. When will the Scottish Tories start to listen to the people of Scotland? Because this is not about the SNP. This is about the Scottish Parliament. This is about the people of Scotland. And let's not forget that the Conservatives have lost every single election in Scotland since 1955. You've been defeated. Yeah, you can see, look at the 13 that have been elected. There are 35 of us here from the Scottish National Party that won the election for Scotland. That's the reality. The Conservatives are in a minority administration in the Parliament. You would love to have the majority of MPs that we have from Scotland, and I can tell you this, it's not likely to happen. We have defended the sentiment time and time again, and we're here to do it again today. Why today, some in this chamber might ask? Well, the facts of this matter are, over the past few weeks, we've seen the biggest power grab conducted by this government since devolution. We have seen we have seen the Tory government disrespect the Scottish Parliament, the Scottish Government and the Scottish people. The interests and the democratic choices of the people of Scotland have been shoved aside by the UK Government. Devolution has been downgraded and the authority of our Parliament has been diminished. While the Tory Government in London seeks to destroy our constitutional settlement and undermine the sovereignty of the Scottish people, we in the SNP will not let the Scottish people be ignored. We will do all that we... Turn up the volume. Turn up the volume. Turn up the volume. I would simply say, just carry on. Carry on. Because what you've just done is insulted the people of Scotland, as you continue to do. We will do all that we can to ensure that the wishes of the Scottish people are respected. Today, we ask as well, I hear Scotland's watching, but the question to the Conservatives, will you respect the sovereignty of the people of Scotland, yes or no, because you've failed dismally to do it up till now?
I respect... Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I hugely respect the fact that the Right Honourable Member says he will respect the wishes of the Scottish people. Will that extend to respecting the wishes of the Scottish people that they voted no in a referendum and that was to be an end to it?
We have respected that. We have respected
I'm not sure that the Honourable Lady has been listening to me, because I actually made that point. Of course we respect the referendum result in 2014, but the simple fact of the matter is that the circumstances have changed. We're being dragged out of Europe against our will. And I expect that the Honourable Lady wants us to stay in the single market and the customs union as well. I would simply say to the Honourable Lady, she talks about having a second referendum in Euro. What she should do is get behind the Scottish National Party, because let me remind this House, in 2016, The SNP went to the people of Scotland and we sought a mandate to have a referendum on Scottish independence if circumstances in Scotland changed. Guess what? We have a majority for independence in the Scottish Parliament. If you want to protect Scotland's interests in Europe, if you want to stay in the single market and the customs union, it may well be the case that independence for Scotland is the only way to do that. I'm going to make progress. Today we ask this House to consider the claim of right and to recommit itself to the spirit of devolution, to place the people of Scotland at the heart of decisions, not cast them aside. Only a few weeks ago, we witnessed the shameful Tory power grab. This House and this government showed nothing but utter contempt for the devolved administrations as the EU withdrawal bill was pushed through without consideration of the views of the devolved institutions. The Scottish Parliament had voted overwhelmingly, by 93 votes to 30, to refuse legislative consent for Clause 15 of the EU withdrawal bill, and as such, it should not have been passed through the House of Commons with the clause intact. But the Tories decided this was acceptable. They trotted through the lobbies, voting against the will of the Scottish people. That's what you did. Mr. Speaker, we all know that the Sewell Convention established the long-held practice that the UK Government cannot legislate in devolved areas without the consent of the devolved Parliament. Well, we at least thought we did. Well, there we are. This is the sovereign Parliament. You might want to say that to your voters in Scotland, that you don't believe that it's the people of Scotland that are sovereign, as was defined in the court case in 1953, that you're prepared to throw away the sovereignty of the people of Scotland and allow Westminster to do whatever it likes. Well, frankly, that's not acceptable to the rest of us. How can you be Secretary of State for Scotland if you behave in such a line? That's not the Secretary of State for Scotland. That is the government's man in Scotland. Now we have reached... sit down.
Order. Just before the right honourable gentleman continues, can I appeal to colleagues to lower the temperature? Passion is fine, and of course the right honourable gentleman has the floor and is perfectly entitled to refuse to take an intervention. But I think simply to say baldly, sit down to any member is less than the courtesy we normally get from the right honourable gentleman. I know that he may feel he's being provoked, but he must avoid being provoked. And he's certainly not being provoked by the Secretary of State. So let's just try to lower the temperature and have the debate on the issues rather than on personalities. Mr Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Now we have reached a dangerous and difficult place, thanks to the Tories, which has exposed their lack of commitment to the Sewell Convention. Their Brexit power grab has basically ripped up the Sewell Convention and plunged us into constitutional crisis. We are in unknown territory. Only if the UK Government acts to recognise and respect the will of the Parliament can we repair some of the damage. And I say again to the Government, you have acted without the consent of the Scottish Parliament. Bring forward legislation that will protect the powers of the Scottish Parliament, and do it now. If the Secretary of State recognises his role in defending devolution, he should do so. And a failure to do that should mean that, quite frankly, he should resign, because he is not standing up for the interests of the people of Scotland. Mr Speaker, the House should know that it is not simply the SNP's view that the Tory power grab has thrown the devolution settlement into crisis. In Scotland, the feeling is apparent everywhere you go. People right across Scotland want power in Scotland's hands. Recent polling from NatSen revealed that a majority of Scots trust Holyrood to make decisions in areas that the Tories want to grab for Westminster. Over 60% want fishing decisions in Scotland following Brexit, and 59% want farming powers in Scottish hands. And of course we have form, because we know that in 2013 the European Union voted to give additional payments to Scottish crofters and farmers, €230 million odd of additional support, 86% of which was supposed to come to Scotland between 2016 and 2020. What has happened? Westminster has handed over 16.5% of it. The rest has gone into budgets across the rest of the United Kingdom, and crofters and farmers have been shortchanged by a government that have not accepted their obligations to Scottish and farmers, it's little wonder that people in Scotland want to make sure it's the Scottish Parliament that have powers over farming and fishing, not this Tory government that have not just grabbed powers, but have grabbed money out of the pockets of hard-working Scottish crofters and farmers. Mr Speaker, a majority of Scots have lost confidence in the UK's handling of Brexit, with a full 69% now saying they believe it has been badly handled. During earlier debates, we heard the Tories trying to justify the UK government's shoddy power grab by falsely claiming Scotland would not lose powers. However, the Scottish Government published a list of powers at risk. They include powers over fishing, farming, rail franchises and fracking licences, to name but a few. But this Government has shown disrespect to our Parliament more than once. Its legal challenges to the Scottish Parliament's Continuity Bill, for one, clearly shows the arrogance of the Conservative Government when faced with the will of the Scottish people. Why is it right that the Conservative Government believes that it can take the Scottish Parliament and, by extension, the Scottish people to court? Because that, Mr Speaker, is exactly what is happening. What arrogance! What arrogance! The Scottish Parliament voted by 95 votes to 32 to pass the Continuity Bill, aiming at preparing Scotland's laws for the impact of leaving the EU in the light of the refusal to grant a legislative consent motion to Westminster's EU withdrawal bill. The people of Scotland expect the two governments to cooperate on these matters. They also expect that the decisions and the responsibilities of the Scottish Parliament should be respected. The decision, therefore, of the UK Government to attempt to overturn the will of the Scottish Parliament in the courts is unprecedented and unacceptable.
On that point, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. On that point, those who were responsible for framing the devolution settlement have assured me that what is actually happening now is what was intended and is included in and what people voted for in 1997 and is included in the devolution settlement. And if the honourable gentleman is so concerned about Scotland being dragged out of the European Union, why does he not join us in backing a people's vote to give the people a vote on the final deal?
I simply say to the honourable lady, if she wants to stay in Europe and if she wants to stay in the single market and the customs union, there is already a mandate in the Scottish Parliament for a referendum of independence. Join us in protecting Scotland's interests. No, I'm going to make progress. Westminster cannot unilaterally rewrite the devolution settlement and impose UK-wide frameworks in devolved areas without consent. The truth of the matter is that right from the start of the Brexit process, we've seen the UK Government attempting to avoid all attempts at democratic engagement. It took a decision from the courts to force them to consult Parliament over the decision to trigger Article 50. Similarly, the UK Government ignored all requests from the devolved administrations to be involved in the process of triggering Article 50, despite Scotland voting overwhelmingly to remain in the EU. Where's the respect? Where's the engagement? There was none. But the Tories haven't just ignored the will of the Scottish Parliament, they ignore the interests of the Scottish people. For years now, their austerity agenda has punished the people of Scotland. The Tory obsession with punishing the poor and protecting the rich has seen families struggle in hardship, women denied the right to a fair pension, and women who have been made victims of rape made to justify their rights to child benefit. Absolutely shameful. The policies of this Tory government are morally repugnant. They have no place in a civilised, compassionate Scotland. In January 26, 2012, Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister of Scotland, led a debate on the claim of right with the motion that the Parliament acknowledges that the sovereign right of the Scottish people to determine the form of government best suited to their needs and declares and pledges that in all its actions and deliberations their interests shall be paramount. At that time, 102 MSPs voted for the motion, with 14 Tories voting against it, the same old Tories voting against the sovereignty of the Scottish people. You see, even then, Mr Speaker, the Tories could not, would not stand up for the Scottish people.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for giving way. He's talking about the words of Nicola Sturgeon, and I just wanted to draw his attention to the words of Nicola Sturgeon at the Aberdeen conference, SNP conference in 2015, when she said to propose another referendum in the next Parliament without strong evidence that a significant number of those who voted no have changed their minds would be wrong, and we won't do it. It would not be respecting the decision that people made. What has changed since Nicola Sturgeon said that?
Well, for the hard of hearing on the Labour branches, Brexit. The Tories pay lip service to devolution, but they do not believe in it. They do not believe that the Scottish people should have the right to determine the government that best suits their need. Mr Speaker, what are they afraid of? Afraid of power being in the hands of the Scottish people. Surely we are all democrats. Surely now even the UK government must accept that it's the people that we serve, not that they serve us. Mr Speaker, that is the crux of this debate. With the quote that I began my remarks with, in Scotland things are different because our view of government is different. It is not top-down, it is ground-up. The single job of government is to serve the interests of our people. It is to carry out their will, and it is to improve their lives, something the Tories are yet to learn. Well, today, let them learn this, that in Scotland the people of Scotland are sovereign, and that the Scottish Parliament embodies the sovereignty of the Scottish people. Next year sees the 20th anniversary of the re-establishment of the Scottish Parliament, something that was fought for generations by many people. Yet our Scottish Parliament finds itself... I hear someone shouting, not you.
It was one of your own colleagues, actually.
Well, if the comment has been made about the Conservatives, then it's absolutely right, because let's not forget that bill after bill had been brought forward to this Parliament from 1913, right through to the establishment of the Scottish Parliament in 1997. The Conservatives opposed devolution. Mr Speaker, they're still opposing devolution. That's why, with such glee, they're attacking the powers of the Scottish Parliament, led by this so-called Secretary of State for Scotland. He should be ashamed of himself. Mr Speaker, our Scottish Parliament finds itself under threat of a power grab from the very party which opposed its creation in the first place. More than 2 decades after Scotland voted for a Scottish Parliament, the UK Government's withdrawal bill constitutes the biggest power grab since devolution. The Secretary of State promised a powers bonanza to the Scottish Parliament, while his colleague, the DEFRA Secretary, even went as far as to suggest immigration powers could be devolved to Scotland. Despite that promise, the Secretary of State for Scotland consistently failed to name one power in that bonanza coming back to Scotland. In December 2017, the Secretary of State for Scotland promised that amendments would be made to the withdrawal bill during the report stage before going back on that promise and allowing amendments to be made only in the unelected House of Lords. The Secretary of State has not once apologised for the fact that this House never had that opportunity. This elected chamber never had the opportunity to discuss amendments to the withdrawal bill that affected devolution of Scotland, showing utter contempt for our Parliament and for our people. Since then, the Secretary of State has been missing in action, refusing to lead on an emergency debate on the Sewell Convention called by the SNP, following the refusal to allow time to debate Clause 15 once the withdrawal bill had returned from the Lords. If members are not convinced of his inadequacy for the job, then hear this. The Secretary of State removed all doubt as to his views when he recently said that Scotland is not a partner in the UK, not equal. That is exactly what this government thinks of the people of Scotland, and its actions reflect that sentiment. The Secretary of State can't stand up for Scotland as he does not recognise Scotland as a partner in the United Kingdom. He has unilaterally downgraded our role. It is little wonder he is without consequence in standing up for Scotland. Mr Speaker, what a damning indictment of the Tory party.
Mr Speaker,
The right honourable gentleman sets out his case now for independence, which is to be based on deceit and misrepresentation. I never once said, Mr Speaker, and I have Hansard here to prove it, that Scotland was not part of the United Kingdom, not a partner in the United Kingdom. What honourable members opposite claim is that Scotland is a partner of the United Kingdom because they want Scotland and the United Kingdom to be separate things. They are not. Scotland is part of the United Kingdom. Scotland is at the heart of the United Kingdom, and ultimately that's what the right honourable gentleman objects to.
Mr Speaker, what we object to is a Secretary of State that can't do his job in standing up for the people of Scotland. And the simple fact of the matter is, what we're doing today is we're talking about the claim of right for Scotland. We're not arguing for independence for Scotland. That day will come. We're simply talking about the principle and where sovereignty lies. And we are affirming the rights of the people of Scotland to be sovereign. And everyone can see what is going on here is that the Conservative MPs seem to be denying the rights of the people to that sovereignty. Let me lay this challenge to the Conservatives here and now. We have placed a motion before you. Have the guts to come through the lobbies tonight with us, affirming the sovereignty of the Scottish people, or if you so dare, oppose that motion. Show you have the guts to stand in the face of the motion that we have in front of us. Because if you fail to do so, then it will be the accepted will of this House that we've accepted the sovereignty of the Scottish people. So tonight you have a choice. You can sit and chunter and shout and bawl and laugh as you've done since this debate started, or you can go through the lobbies later on and you can stand up for the people of Scotland, you can affirm the sovereignty of the people of Scotland, or you can flunk it. Because history has shown that every step of the way you've argued against the interests of the people of Scotland.
Just to simply say, this side never walked out and turned their backs on the people of Scotland from this Parliament, but your side did turn their back on the people of Scotland.
You know, the simple fact of the matter is that we were faced with a situation, and he should be ashamed, that the Conservative government pushed through the withdrawal bill that took powers from the Scottish Parliament without a debate in this House. And the honourable member and all his friends went through the lobbies to take these powers from the people of Scotland. I'm proud of the fact that it's the Scottish National Party that's standing up for the people of Scotland. What the Conservatives are doing is allowing Scotland to be walked all over, and the honourable gentleman and his friends are guilty as charged of having done that. Mr Speaker, a party with no mandate to speak for Scotland but thinks it can do whatever it wants to Scotland and get away with it. They opposed devolution in the first place. They've consistently voted against Scotland's interests, and now they want to dismantle the rights of our Parliament, downgrading devolution and dismissing the views of the people of Scotland. Mr Speaker, the people of Scotland asked for none of this. They voted decisively against leaving the European Union, yet now they face the socio-economic chaos from a hard Tory Brexit. Before she became Prime Minister, Theresa May set out her view of a UK in which Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England continues to flourish side by side, but as equal partners. Yet, Mr Speaker, the views of the people of Scotland are disregarded. Instead, the Prime Minister has shut out and silenced the people of Scotland from the Brexit debate. The Secretary of State for Scotland wasn't even invited to the meeting at Chequers where they discussed Brexit. His views were not called upon, inconsequential in the process that the UK Government was going through. Mr Speaker, whilst the Scottish Parliament is not yet 20 years old, it has made remarkable achievements. From free education, personal care and prescriptions, world-leading climate change targets, the smoking ban, huge strides forward in attitudes towards sectarianism, sexual equality and multiculturalism. Meanwhile, waiting times are here. You know what? What you find is when you look at A&E in Scottish hospitals, the record is far better than the Conservative government in London. And the honourable member for Ayr rather than doing down the health service in Scotland, should be talking up the successes of the Scottish Parliament, the Government, in delivering for the people of Scotland. Meanwhile, in Westminster, the cruel and callous Tory policies such as the rape clause, the bedroom tax, austerity and, of course, Brexit stand in stark contrast to our approach. In Scotland, we do things differently, and this place needs to recognise that the first step is for Westminster to respect the will of the Scottish Parliament. Will this place do it? Will this House recognise that the Scottish Parliament has not given a consent motion to the withdrawal bill? Will this Parliament now recant and make sure the powers that have been grabbed are sent back to the Scottish Parliament? Because that's what the people of Scotland expect. You know, we were promised in 2014, with Gordon Brown saying that a no vote in the independence referendum would lead to changes offering as close to federalism as possible. In the end, nothing close to that was delivered. And before the Tories leaped from the benches, yes, we in the SNP respect the will of the Scottish people decided in 2014. But the claim of right is important because it allows for the sovereignty of Scotland to choose, and that means if Scotland decides it wants change, then it should be respected. Why should Conservatives stand in the way of the sovereignty and the rights of the Scottish people? And why should Scottish Conservatives allow that to happen? It's their responsibility not to stand up for their constituents, their needs and their wishes. Mr Speaker, the Scottish Government was elected in May 2016 on a manifesto which said in relation to independence, the Scottish Parliament should have the right to hold another referendum if there is a significant and material change in the circumstances that prevailed in 2014, such as Scotland being taken out of the EU against our will. Mr Speaker, given events since 2016, there is therefore no question about the legitimacy of the Scottish Parliament and the people of Scotland to consider the question of independence. Everything has changed. Now, this Parliament today must show that it understands, recognises and respects the rights of the Scottish people to determine the form of government best suited to their needs, including during this time of significant change. I urge all members to defend the interests of the people of Scotland and to vote to recognise the claim of the right of the Scottish people. Our people's sovereignty, Scotland's sovereignty, must be and will be respected.